Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? Volunteering is a huge aspect of being an IEEE member. It enables you to interact with your community and make it a better place. Bearing this in mind, the IEEE Kerala Section and IEEE Link as a part of Renaissance 2.0, supported by R10 SAC MDLT, organized this session on volunteering, ethics and guidelines by Mr. Satish Babu, President and co-founder of In-App Information Technologies. He will be sharing insights on the ethics and etiquettes for IEEE volunteers, which are essential for any volunteer in a leadership position. IEEE is defined as the strength of its members and their voluntary efforts across the board. Volunteering is not only beneficial to IEEE as an organization, but it is also one of the most valuable member perks. From technical and student activities to student outreach, membership growth, and history, there is something for everyone. By volunteering with IEEE, you have an opportunity to take part in activities that interest you, broaden your knowledge, and develop essential leadership skills. I'd like to provide a quick introduction on Satish sir before we begin. He is a free software activist, early internet advocate, and the president and co-founder of In-App Information Technologies. He has held various leadership roles throughout his career, including being the past section chair of IEEE. Currently, he is the chair of ICANN, a non-profit organization dedicated to keeping the internet secure, stable, and interoperable. He is also associated with various international and national professional societies, such as the Internet Society and the Computer Society of India. An awardee of the IEEE MGA Achievement Award, he is a world-renowned eminent speaker. Sir, it is a privilege to have you here for our session. Now, I'd hand over the session to Satish, sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, sir. Perfectly.
Okay, can you share my presentation, please?
Yes, sir. Just a moment. Promise.
Yes, sir. I'm pressing it. I hope it's visible now, sir.
Not yet, but it's probably coming. Yeah, I can see it now. So good evening and welcome to this session. Congratulations to the organizers of this session. It is indeed important to talk about ethics and etiquette and conflicts of interest. As we start out being IEEE volunteers, we have to also, there are of course many privileges that come with volunteering in IEEE. There are also some obligations. And IEEE is an organization that converts or turns us from just being a student or a somebody who's working in a technical area to a professional. Next slide, please. So this is my overview of what I'm going to talk today. I'll be speaking for about 40 minutes. Then we can have some interactions, questions, comments. If you don't agree with me, you can raise it, no problems. So I'm going to talk about the global context that we are operating in, what is meant by ethical behavior, what are conflicts of interest, and what are some matters of etiquette and conclusions. Next, please. So we are IEEE, and our domain, which is that of technology, engineering, and research, is globalized. Our operations straddle many time zones, languages, and cultures. We are very diverse. So wherever you go in the world, you have IEEE. I remember once going into Baku. Baku is the capital of Azerbaijan, which is in Caucasus. And when I was about planning my trip, I got a message saying that the local IEEE section wants a talk. So I never expected IEEE to be active in, of all places, in Azerbaijan. But they were actually quite active, and we are still in touch with the people there. We are known for our professional reputation. So when you say you're an IEEE member, you're an IEEE senior member, this has got connotations of being, of the proper integrity and the reputation. Each volunteer and volunteer leaders are IEEE ambassadors. Etiquette and ethics are actually not just for IEEE, it's also very important for us. And IEEE is a community. We work through consensus and respect for other members and for the decisions of the organization. So what we're trying to say here is that IEEE, like Kerala section, is one of the biggest sections in terms of membership. So it's a large community. We have all kinds of people at all ages, at all levels of seniority. Now, when you interact in such an environment, we have to be aware of the fact that we have to operate respectfully, both vis-a-vis other members and also to the decisions taken by the organization. Next slide, please. Now, we are currently facing an extraordinary situation of COVID-19. Our face-to-face events, which were very interesting for us and which is our mainstay in terms of activities, is now restricted. We still have, of course, events like this one, which are basically electronic. So although we have lost out on face-to-face events, it has enhanced electronic forms of communication, including for large meetings. Some of the meetings that I attend have been for 2,500 plus people. And we are currently planning an event in India, which is expected to have 10,000 people virtually participating. So you can imagine the complexities of such an event, because if you use chat, for example, if 10,000 people are typing into the chat, you can't even see it scrolling by. So there are extraordinary complexities also of such events. And the point is, we need guidelines for organizing safe and successful online meetings. So there are all kinds of disruptions that can happen. In Zoom, we hear of Zoom bombing, which has happened to us several times. So it is not very difficult to disrupt meetings. So it is important to have, although I'm not going to cover in this particular talk how to avoid these kind of situations, but these are real, very real now. Now, in this presentation, I'm looking at different aspects of ethics, conflicts of interest, and communication etiquette. Next, please. Next. So many of you are young people who are just starting out, or still students are starting out on your careers. Some of us are much older. In any case, our careers can span several decades. Now, you might think that acting dishonestly or unethically may provide short-term advantages. However, this is never true in the long run. And we must note that integrity is very fragile. Once you lose it, it's very hard to regain it. You never kind of come out of that, loss of reputation. Next. Another thing is honesty. We may have to work with many different kinds of organizations and individuals. In these dealings, we should not and we shall not misrepresent facts or positions about ourselves or others. So we have to be truthful in how we project ourselves in these kind of contexts in IEEE. This is good advice even outside IEEE, because if you misrepresent, you will eventually get caught out. Now, our reports and publications, financial as well as others, are reviewed by the public, academic and research institutions, government agencies, and our auditors. We follow established accounting procedures to ensure the complete and accurate recording of all transactions. So financial aspects are also important. And there will be no retaliation against individuals who report questionable accounting or other practices. So if you feel that something that you see within the organization does not look right, you have all rights to report that to whoever your immediate head of your unit is. And there shall not be any retaliation just because you made a complaint which you thought was pertinent. Next slide. Now, if you look at our code of conduct, now IEEE is one of the few organizations which have a code of conduct. It is actually quite important because we always talk about integrity in many organizations, but we don't actually say what it is. So I would ask you to read the code of conduct very carefully and to internalize, to understand what it is talking about. And we will be using some of that material here in the presentation. So IEEE stated objective of fairness in conduct. What does that involve? be respectful of others, and treat people fairly. Now, when you have such a large community as IEEE, you will have people of all kinds of different opinions and positions in life. IEEE is not a political organization. We don't discuss politics. But even in the domains that we do discuss, there can be quite different opinions, and we have to be respectful. We can, of course, talk about these opinions. We can try to resolve the differences, but that process has to be respectful, and we have to treat people fairly. Avoid injuring others, their property, reputation, or employment. This is coming out of the code of conduct. Comply with the applicable laws in all countries where IEEE does business. Now, this is a huge challenge because many of these laws are at variance with each other. And how does IEEE finally harmonize? Now, later on, we will see that if there is a conflict between IEEE's policies and the laws of a country that IEEE is operating in, then the laws of the country will prevail over IEEE's policy. So IEEE as a global organization has an obligation to comply with local laws. IEEE has to comply with its own policies and procedures, refrain from retaliation, as we talked about, support and respect diversity. Now, diversity is one thing that we do not talk about much, but diversity is very key. And if you go to some of the Western countries, you will see what is really diversity. So we will see in one of the next slides what are the different aspects of diversity. And finally, we try to foster the IEEE vision of advancing technology for humanity by maintaining our social commitment. Kerala Section, of course, has been quite at the forefront of this. Right from student members onwards, there are all kinds of projects that our members are working on, which is very good. Next slide, please. Now, discrimination is the opposite side of diversity. If you can't tolerate diversity, that is often because of discrimination. We will not engage in harassment of any kind, including sexual harassment or bullying behavior, whether in person or online. We will not discriminate against any person as per existing law in different countries. Now, some countries have very clear guidelines on what constitutes discrimination. For instance, some of the factors mentioned here, we will not discriminate against or harass anyone based on any of the following characteristics: race, color, religion, sex, national origin, age, pregnancy, citizenship, disability, marital or familial status, sexual orientation, military or veteran status, size, gender identity, physical appearance, HIV status, ancestry, genetic predisposition, or family responsibilities. Now, this is a big list, and we may not even understand what these are. For example, family responsibilities. How does that impact IEEE? The point is, although it may not be clear, the gender aspect of some of the discrimination is very pernicious. Pernicious basically meaning it runs very deep. So in some cases, single mothers are discriminated because they are single mothers. So that is actually in the US, that will be a illegal act. But of course, here in India, we are not conscious of such kind of things. But this is just to point to the fact that we have to be conscious. Now that we're all members of IEEE, we are not just like an ordinary person on the street. We have to be better. And this is by, how do we become better? Because that process is kind of mediated by the fact that you are aware of these kind of differences. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Right. So compliance. Now, compliance is a very important matter, because if we are not complying with local laws, we can be kicked out of the country. And compliance in our case means all auditing, reporting aspects, but more importantly, also finance. So for a long time, we were in a legal gray area, because each section was getting the rebates and all the payments directly to section accounts. So Kerala section had a bank account in Trivandrum, and IEEE was directly transferring the money to us. But that was illegal under Indian law, because India has very specific legal provisions on how we can receive foreign funding, no matter what that funding is for. So we conveyed this problem to IEEE, and they set about to harmonize. So if you look at the second point here, it says if IEEE procedures or practices are in conflict with local laws, the latter will prevail. Local laws will prevail. So IEEE did exactly that. So IEEE realized this is illegal. So they set about harmonizing the two by creating an IEEE office here, and then taking permission from the Government of India, getting the registration and routing all the funding through that office. So we are no longer under any problem now for the last many years. I think it's about 8 or 9 years now. So that problem has been solved. But other organizations still continue to have such problems. So they also have to kind of adopt this kind of a model. Next. Now, you might have studied optics in physics, but this optics is different. In behavioral sciences and in management, optics refers to how others perceive a decision or behavior. So optics is how, from an outsider's point of view, a particular decision looks like. Is it a fair decision, or is it an unfair decision? Is it transparent? For example, a well-meaning decisions may appear to be faulty because not enough care was taken to maintain transparency, and this leads to poor optics. Keep in mind the axiom, justice must be done and it must be seen to be done. So we have to go that extra mile. This means that not only should we be transparent in our decisions, but we must also be seen to be transparent. So when you have a group of people, the optics becomes very important, because that is what will separate us from just a random group of people, because we take care whenever we decide something that the reasons why that decision is taken, how it is taken, there is a procedure. So such transparency will avoid problems of optics. Next. Conflicts of interest. Now, what are these conflicts of interest? Now, this is a situation when we have a professional, personal, or financial or business interest that interferes with, or based on optics, or appears to interfere with your ability to work fairly and ethically. So whenever you are in a situation where your normal style of functioning is hampered by the fact that you have personal interest or financial interest or business interest, that at least from the outside, you may not have any interest like that, but outsiders may feel that you have such an interest. Our policy regarding conflict of interest is simple. Avoid real or perceived conflicts of interest wherever possible, and disclose them to affected parties when they do exist. So real or perceived conflicts of interest. So they may not be actually a real interest, but others may, from an optics perspective, others may feel that this person has a conflict of interest. Now, this is also useful in any group situation, so that you take care of the conflicts of interest. Typically, these issues arise in settings where you receive gifts or favors from a customer or supplier, or you allow family or personal relationships to influence our professional judgment. Both are very significant situations, but the first one, at least in IEEE Kerala section, there are not many of financial decisions, and then those are taken by the sectional leadership. So that doesn't much happen with us. The second point is very important for us, because we cannot have a situation whereby our personal relationships become a factor in our professional judgment. That is a very extreme kind of conflict of interest. It will have quite heavy repercussions if you start working in that kind of a style. Next. Separating personal and official matters. All official decisions must be made in a fair and impartial way. I mean, I would say all decisions must be made in that way, based on sound management and business practices, and not influenced by family or personal concerns or interests. We should take care not to involve family members or partners unless with strong rationale and explicit knowledge of everybody concerned. You must disclose situations where family members are involved if this already exists. So this is something that we have to apply in our IEEE social life, that we may have a close friend or we may have a partner who's part of the group, and in fact, in some situations, some legal situations, this is seen as an illegal thing. For example, on the people strongly advise on a board of directors of a company. Suppose you're starting a startup and you pull in your girlfriend or boyfriend into the board of directors of the startup. Now, having a couple like that on the startup's board is actually a distortion. In some situations that will be illegal, in some situations it is legal but not recommended, because that creates an access within the board, and then it distorts the regular meeting of, or the process of deciding by the board. So now that is the board of directors of a company, but here we're talking about a community of IEEE. Here also, any such conflict should be avoided. Next. Next. So far we talked about conflict of interest and ethics. Now, the third part of my presentation is going to be on etiquette. Now, there is actually something more, which is security, because since we are now getting online, there are all kinds of security issues which also now keep coming up. But that's something because it doesn't fit into this framework, so I have not kind of brought it here. First aspect is protecting confidential information. We are committed to protecting the confidential information or personal information of members, sponsors, and other parties. Now, this is a hugely pertinent point because there's a legal aspect. India is now finalizing its PDP, Personal Data Protection Bill. The GDPR in Europe, the General Data Protection Regulation, has made sweeping changes to the whole issue of personal data. The general principle is that unless you have informed consent of so-called data subjects, you cannot collect the data, nor can you process their data, nor can you store their data. And there are so many complexities of that. It's very simple to state. But whether you are a company producing software which collects people's details, or you are a user yourself, there are quite wide and sweeping implications with even financial implications. There's a big fine that can come to you if you misuse data collected. Now, in our context, so whenever we have an event, we have a form, and people fill in the registration form, they enter their email ID. So IEEE itself has to be fully compliant. They also have to follow GDPR. But GDPR is actually extraterritorial. So you may be sitting in India, but if the user is sitting in anywhere in Europe, then GDPR automatically applies to you. Your company may be in India, but it will apply to you if one of the users is coming from Europe. Now, besides direct protection of computers and databases, this also involves protection against viruses, trojans, keystroke loggers, ransomware, and other malware, as well as social engineering attempts. Now, if you collect data and if you have a database of the data, it is your duty and obligation to protect it from all these attempts to steal data. So there are many ways of stealing data from individuals' computers also from the cloud. So it's our responsibility to ensure that we have a privacy policy, and we collect data only according to that. We are also subject to laws requiring that we meet strict confidentiality and confidentiality standards for many kinds of personal information. Now, remember, most of this problem is for personal information, any information that can identify an individual. It doesn't apply to legal. I mean, there's something called a natural person and a legal person. Natural person is an individual human being. A legal person is a company or a partnership. So this law does not apply to those. It only applies to individuals. But any data, including your location or IP address, your name, telephone number, email ID, these are all coming under the purview of personal data. So storing all media, including paper, memory sticks, etc., with containing confidential information in a locked, secure location when not in use, protecting your computer or mobile, using strong passwords, maintaining appropriate safeguards, including encryption for sensitive data when located on devices such as mobile devices, laptops, external hard drives, etc. In fact, GDPR talks about encryption of data at rest and data in motion. What that means is data at rest is when data is sitting in a database. You have to encrypt it. Data in motion means when you're transmitting data over the wire, over the internet. There also you have to encrypt it. That's what GDPR recommends. Now, India's law is not as strict as GDPR, but still it is quite, we'll have to see how it unfolds in the next few months. Next. Preserving confidentiality in communications. Now, this is a slightly different topic. This is when you have a company, for example. A company operates by fiat, which means by order. The CEO decides, and an order is issued, and the order is going down the line, gets implemented. IEEE is not a company. We are a community. So it is slightly different here. But here also, we do have a structure. So organizations are structured in a layered fashion for a purpose. It's called form follows function. That means you create a structure based on how you want it to work. So you have in IEEE, we have a section leadership, we have an execom, we have different affinity groups and student branches, and so we have a structure, and that structure is for a certain function. Now, communications between the layers of the structure are bound by confidentiality and the need to know basis. Some of our decision is public for everybody, every member of Kerala section to know. Some are even for the general public to know, but some are not. So that differentiation you have to keep in mind. As professionals, we must preserve confidentiality of information where required. Be parsimonious with information. Parsimonious means stingy. Be careful when you kind of give out information. Share it with only those that are authorized to access information. And if you violate this principle, it can become uncontainable. Situations can become uncontainable. We have experienced some of such situations in the past, so we are very careful in putting this point across. Next. Communication etiquette. Now, we do most of our work in IEEE over meetings like this, or email, or WhatsApp, or those kind of messaging systems. Now, we all have our own styles of interactions, but there are some common factors that you have to be considerate, basically, so that you're respectful of other people also. So we would want to strive for secure electronic communication. So secure network, websites, email, internet access, messaging, voicemail, etc. Improper use of weak communication systems may lead to issues of discrimination, harassment, copyright infringement, insider trading, antitrust violations, loss of trade secrets, and other legal problems. Now, some of these things we are not talked about, what is insider trading, etc. Now, we are not just talking about IEEE Kerala sections volunteers, because many of our volunteers operate in the broader IEEE. And some of you will also, as you go forward, you will go higher and higher in the IEEE hierarchy. And you'll be operating in international groups where there is confidential information. And if you are not careful about it, you could get into trouble. If you violate the whatever norms are there for those kind of information. Next. Now, electronic communications. Now, this is what this slide talks about, is not cast in concrete, meaning this is a thing that individually people may differ. That's fine. This is just to kind of ensure that we are careful about some of these aspects. But you can, if you are confident, you can, of course, behave differently also. There's no problem. When you compose your email, assume that the message may not be private. So the person that you're sending that mail to, he or she may forward it to somebody else. So ensure you compose your mail keeping that in mind. So do not make it so precarious that if that information goes out, you are going to be in trouble. So you have to be careful with that. Think twice before sending out the mail, especially if it's got strong language. Do not shout. Shout meaning type in all caps. That is equivalent of shouting. The problem with email is it is too easy to send. So sometimes you get an email, you become angry, and you immediately compose a response, and without even thinking, you send it off. Google gives you some 10 seconds to undo or cancel that send. But once the 10 seconds are over, you are in trouble. If you have overexposed yourself, that mail cannot come back, and especially if you do a CC to many people. Do not overuse abbreviations or emojis, especially when you have a mixed group. Your own group may have, you may be always using emojis and some abbreviations. But when you have a broader group, you must keep in mind that they may not know what you're talking about through these emojis. Send the mail only to directly related persons. Do not include too many unrelated people. Format your mail to create a favorable impression. Do not overuse BCC. Now, BCC is a tricky thing. Many people don't like BCC. If I get a message where I am marked as BCC, I don't like the situation, because either be upfront about who is in the loop, or don't include me. So be careful when doing. There are situations where you might want to do this, but do not make it all the time. One legitimate use of BCC is when you have a mixed group of people who do not know each other, but we have to send the same message to all of them, and we don't want the emails to be available for each other. So we put it all in BCC so that everybody gets a message, but we are not sharing their collective email IDs. Ensure that the sender's name is clearly mentioned. Respond to mail in a reasonable time. So different people have different styles of responding. Some people take 2 days as routine response. Some people respond in 5 minutes. So that depends on how much online, how much time you are online. Next, please. When you schedule an online meeting, do not assume that everybody will be in a single time zone. If there are international participants, you have to use UTC as a reference time standard. Some people use GMT. Unfortunately, GMT is not the difference between UTC and GMT, although for most part the time is actually the same, is that UTC is an international standard. GMT is the UK's national time zone, and that changes during daylight savings time, whereas UTC never changes. So UTC is a universal, that abbreviation is a French abbreviation. It's standard for Universal Coordinated Time. So UTC is what you follow if you have international participants. Be careful in using reply all. In many situations, one-to-one personal communication may be more effective than group communication. Use professional salutations. Remember, we are a professional society. When our official mails go out, we have to have professional salutations. Dear Mr., dear Ms., or hi is fine, but not very overly casual kind of things. Now, one of the problems that you learn when you deal with multiple cultures is that sarcasm and humor are culture dependent, and they don't translate easily. For people who are using English as a second language, sometimes people don't even get it, what you're trying to convey through sarcasm or humor. So be direct, state the direct thing. Do not overuse these kind of things unless you know the people very well. Double check the target email before you send it out. So some people compose a message first, and after they are perfect, they craft their message, meaning they work on it multiple times, they go read through it, make fine changes, and then only they put the email ID. Some people put the email ID first and then compose a message, and sometimes they even send it out, then realize that they have not added somebody. So all this happens, but working with email is a kind of art, because when you see a properly composed email, you know that this person knows what he or she is doing. Whereas some other emails are completely without any form, meaning no formatting, no line breaks. So when you're in IEEE, you're supposed to be much better than others. So you have to understand this. Next. Sensitivity in interpersonal interactions. In personal as well as electronic interactions, we have to be respectful. This we have already stated. Ensure that you're careful about gender, cultural, political sensitivities, even when you're mentoring and advising colleagues. Now, you may have situations where you are mentoring a group of students. So remember that IEEE is a professional platform. It is not meant for anything but technical collaboration. If you start bringing in any other issue, there are so many issues in our country, but IEEE is not meant for any of those. So we have to be careful when another aspect is gender. When you have mixed groups of men and women, you have to ensure that everybody has their spaces. You cannot kind of crowd people, and different people take it differently. So as the leader of the group, as a mentor, you have to be careful that everybody gets their spaces and nobody is feeling crowded. Ensure that there are consultations with senior colleagues while planning events in order to plan things well. So when you plan an event, and most of what I'm talking in the last two or three slides is from experiences that we have had. So we have to include some of the senior people when you plan events so that their advice also comes in. So that actually, over a period of time, you'll find that brings in some quality. Avoid situations of confrontation. Ensure that practices such as smoking, consumption of alcohol, or substance abuse are avoided in official events. Next. Now, many organizations and even events like conferences have something called expected standards of behavior. Now, this is an explicit, we also have a similar document, it's being developed. This is an explicit document that tells what you can do, what you cannot do, whether it's online or physical or virtual or hybrid, whatever it is. There are certain things you're not permitted to do. Now, reporting of violations. Now, one of the things that is there in the expected standards of behavior is that if you have a complaint, who do you report it to? Now, we have to be very careful, no matter who we are. we must know what is the mechanism in the Kerala section where complaints can be reported. So the usual practice is to talk to your immediate, senior person. But sometimes the problem is with the senior person. Then what do you do? So there are ways of handling this. So I would urge you to kind of discuss and understand what is the system that we have in place. We have a responsibility to understand and follow our organization's policies, procedures, and laws. Likewise, we are required to report violations when we observe them. We will treat the information reported confidentially to the extent possible, consistent with our obligation to investigate. So if there is a complaint and the section officials look at it, the disciplinary committee looks at it, they think it is a serious thing, then they will take up a process. So, and we have done this in the past, so we know what to do. So the main point here is, if you see something that is directed at you or at somebody else that you think is not correct, you have a right to kind of report it. Next. Okay, this is my last slide. IEEE is a professional association, and each member of IEEE is considered to be a professional. A person does not become a professional merely by completing a degree. Professionalism is achieved when we are aware of how to think, speak, work, and act in a way that promotes ethics and excellence. As not just an IEEE member, but also a leader. All of you, I'm sure, are leaders also. But also as a leader, each of us must be an exemplar to the others, especially for the next generation of members. So when you advance in your ranks, meaning when you advance to the next level in IEEE, there'll be many more newcomers who work with you, and for them, you have to be an exemplar. So that is the kind of vision that we have for our volunteers. Next. So thank you, and once again, I'm thankful to the organizers for this opportunity. If anybody has any questions. One other thing I would like to state is that in a group meeting, it's also, although I have not said in the slides, it's also extremely important to stick to time. I've seen so many meetings when things go completely out of whack. People don't stop talking, people don't plan the meetings ahead, and then you'll find that something has been squeezed. So that is not a good way to kind of run a meeting. And as professionals, we also have to be very careful that we don't exceed the time allocated to us. So thank you, and back to the moderator for any questions.
Thank you, sir. So let's get started with the interactive session. The audience, you can ask any queries you have in the chat box. Sir, until then, a question. What are some ethical duties or obligations you feel young IEEE members often take for granted or fail to meet?
Right. So as you start in your IEEE career, you will start understanding more by way of the whole international structure of IEEE works, how we can contribute to IEEE, how we can organize. Now, what is IEEE finally? What if you ask the question, what does an average member get out of IEEE? IEEE is a platform which is available to you to organize your own events, to collaborate with other parts of the world community. So what we have to be careful in is, as a engineering professional, as a technical professional, ethics comes in the way you work. Say, for example, research. There are so many unethical practices that people do. For example, there is a project proposal, or they want to do their end of the course project. I've seen so many. There was a time when I used to be involved in recruiting people for my company in Technopark. So in the final round of interview, my questions always used to be on the student project that they've done. And roughly in about at least 30 to 40% cases, I find that either that project is completely bogus, or this person has not really kind of contributed to the project because he or she is not able to explain exactly what he or she did. Now that's very clearly unethical. So now there could be some mitigating factors, but still that's not something that you want to do. So, but the core of it, however, is that you have to understand from working with other people, senior people in IEEE, your own leaders, and learn from them the fact that the ethics is actually something that we can easily relate to by observing their behavior, how they handle situations, how they handle things. So all these things like transparency and optics are folded into the larger context of ethics. So when you work with good people who are effective, because anyway you have to manage this community, so it's not easy. But how to ethically manage that is demonstrated by many of our middle level leaders in Kerala section who are actually doing that hands-on. So the easiest way to kind of learn what is good ethics and what is not so good is to observe your own leaders. But some of these are much more, kind of more hard ethics, meaning like plagiarism in papers, not doing kind of things and then claiming. If you look at our code of conduct, you'll see many of these things stated there explicitly. So I'll stop here.
Thank you, sir. So, how do you believe IEEE has shaped you into the person that you are today? And also, being an exemplar leader, what's something that you would like to convey to the audience today?
Right. I don't consider myself as such a great leader or anything like that. It's just that IEEE has exposed me to many situations. And it's not only IEEE, there are also other organizations that I've been active in. Each of these organizations have exposed me to different all kinds of different cultures, different people, different domains, different ways of working. So IEEE is each of these are unique in their own way. I'll take two examples. One is IEEE. IEEE, I've been involved with IEEE Computer Society for many years as the kind of representative from Artin in the global thing. And I've been part of the IEEE Computer Society NomCom, the nominating committee of IEEE Computer Society. So I have had the good fortune of working with all the kind of global leaders of IEEE Computer Society at that time. And that has actually changed my outlook. And it has actually made me much more respectful when you deal with people. Because sometimes, from India, we are kind of hyper about how we connect or relate to others. But we have to take a step backwards. And also, sometimes I had a tendency to talk too fast. I still sometimes do. And given the fact that I have an accent and, at least at that point, it becomes very difficult for the other party. Also, the culture is very different. In Japan, if you ask them a question, they ask them for a favor, they will never say no. But that's because they are programmed not to say no to anything like that, because it is disrespect if you say no. So you have to understand that, and you don't ask such kind of questions. So that is IEEE. The other one is ICANN. So ICANN is also interesting because again, it's a very large global kind of structure. It deals with a very critical resource, that is the internet domain names and numbers and protocol parameters. That they have their own way of working. They have their own communities, and yeah, it is. So they have some interesting courses. They have a course on what is called as intercultural sensitivity. So because ICANN such a mix of people from all the continents, there are these gaps in communication that is coming because of the fact that you're from different culture. You see words differently. English is not even in your language, and ICANN works in 5 languages. And the official translators are there, but sometimes when you interact personally, people don't understand. So ICANN has a framework called intercultural sensitivity course. You have to attend that course. And it gives you a good idea on how kind of different people are. What are the stereotypes? What are the actual things, etc. Another course that they have is chairing skills. Now, what's a chairing skill? A chairing skill is when you're a chair of a group or an organization, and how do you conduct yourself? Now, that chairing process could be a meeting, which is a face-to-face meeting, public, when people are sitting around. It could be a virtual session. And if you look at ICANN meetings, if you are the chair and if your meeting exceeds the time by 1 minute, you have to apologize. And the meeting will start exactly on time. Sometimes you wait for 1 or 2 minutes, but ending cannot go because people have other things to do, other meetings. You cannot hold up other people's time. That's disrespectful. So we move from a situation where everything is kind of loose, like Indian Standard Time. People are very, they don't go exactly on the time. But if you work in some of these contexts, you find that no, you have to be exactly on time. So those are 2 examples of how the international organizations work and what you can gain from these things.
Okay, sir, a final question. What's the best course of action when you end up making a mistake or fail to meet the expected standard?
Yeah, the first step, actually step 0, is to look at what you're trying to commit to deliver, even before you start planning to deliver and all that, because these things are taken very seriously. As a student, you can afford to kind of goof up once in a while. That's not a problem, because sometimes you would experiment, and even if it's something like starting a startup company and it failed, that is not a big deal actually. So because those things happen, the statistical probability of something not working out, especially in the high risk area of startups and so on. That's not what I'm talking about. But when you are part of a community and you volunteer to take on a responsibility, you are actually making a commitment. So before you do that, you have to be very careful whether you will be able to deliver on this. So sometimes we are kind of loose about it, and we say, okay, I'll do it, and you take it on, and then you realize you can't do it. Some things are hard naturally, and unless you are exceptional, you will not be able to kind of deliver on them, given the time and the effort. So the first step 0 is to examine carefully what you're trying to commit, see whether it's feasible. Sometimes it's an individual commitment, sometimes it's a group commitment. In both cases, you have to be sure of your own capabilities and the capabilities of your group, and then only take it on. Once you take it on, then it becomes a public kind of obligation to deliver. Now, if you find that somewhere down the line, 20%, 30% progress, you find that you are in trouble, the right thing to do at that point is escalate the issue and say, look, I have a problem. You have to either reduce my work or increase my team or something like that. And increasing the team sometimes makes it worse. So maybe asking for more time for the same team, or reducing the work, rescoping it, may be easier. So I have seen situations where I was a part of a committee which basically was working on something called IDN. IDN is the internationalized domain names. So like you have www.google.com. So suppose instead of google.com, you wanted a word in Malayalam, or you wanted a new GTLD. Instead of things like dot photography, you wanted dot Kerala in Malayalam. Now for that, it is a very long, complicated process. So there's a working group set up in ICANN for working on this. So I was a member of that. There are 12 people in that committee. So in the first few meetings are scoping meetings. The scoping, we found that this working group has to work for at least 2 years, sometimes maybe 2.5 years, of one meeting per week, 1 hour per week. And this is a very low profile group. There were no perks or any kind of incentives. So after the first 2 or 3 meetings, we found people are dropping off because they realized that they can't get anything out of it. It's a huge amount of work. It's going to take them 2+ years, and they don't see any incentive in them doing it. So they started dropping off. So finally, I was undecided because I had a kind of passion for that particular technology. So I was hanging on, wondering whether I should also drop off. At that point, we were about, instead of the 12 people in the original group, we are about 5 people, me plus 4 others. Then I saw these 4 people saying that no matter how long it is going to take, we are going to finish this, because this is a commitment that we have taken for our community. If it takes 2 years or 3 years, we don't care. We will meet once a week. We will deliver this. So I said, if you are taking that position, I will gladly join you in solidarity. Not because I was such an expert as these other 3 people or 4 people, but because the fact that the community is stepping up and saying that we will do it. Exact same situation is there in IEEE also. In many of these standards making groups, there will be a small number of people who are actually inspiration for the rest of us. They will stand up and say, we will do this. So the answer to your question is that, of course, all of us cannot be that kind of inspirations. But when we take on anything, even at our level, we have to be very careful that we can deliver on it. And if we can't deliver on it, escalate it immediately so that some rectification action can be taken up. So thank you.
So that concludes the interactive session. Thank you, sir, for sharing your knowledge on how to operate in a company and communicate with others. Being an IEEE member, I believe it's extremely important for us members to maintain the highest standards of integrity, and this session will definitely guide us to do so. Satish, sir, we would like to present you a gift of appreciation as a symbol of our gratitude for the valuable time you have spent with us and this insightful session.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Now I request everyone to turn on their cameras for a photo to commemorate this event.
Good evening, everyone. Please turn on your cameras so we can have a quick pic. Thank you for turning your cameras on. A few more people turn the cameras on and you're good to go. So, I guess we can go now. So I'm going to count down to IEEE. So 3, 2, 1. IEEE. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, sir, for that spectacular talk. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, everyone, for turning on your cameras. I find this as my honor and privilege to do the vote of thanks now. Thank you so much, Satish, sir, for taking this wonderful, informative session. The session taught us how to be better volunteers and contribute to the growth of this organization. Thank you for taking us deep into this ethical journey. I want to mention some points that piqued my interest in the whole presentation, like how important privacy of personal data is for IEEE and how IEEE has so many procedures to ensure fairness in all ways. As an IEEE member, this is certainly an exemplar for us. Once again, sir, thank you for your time. I thank all the dignitaries too who joined this event. Also, thank you so much to all the vibrant volunteers who had worked hard for this event to be a success. This session is about you volunteers. At last but not the least, I thank all the participants who joined this session. I hope you can make the most out of the information you found through this session. In case I missed someone, I'm really sorry. Once again, thank you all for your participation. Participants, please note we will be posting the feedback form in the chat box. Do ensure you fill it now. The session has ended. You can leave the meeting now.